Now let's move ahead and discuss the third doctrine, or the third kind of doctrine of the philosophers. Al-Ghazali mentions that the third kind of doctrine are which the religion contradicts with, or which Islam contradicts with. It goes against Islam. The first two were not necessarily which go against Islam. The first one was which verbally might look like it is against Islam or contradicts Islam, but it is just a verbal disagreement. In its meaning, it doesn't. The second one was it just doesn't contradict Islam, rather it is true, it is demonstrable. The third one is in which it clearly contradicts Islam. So Al-Ghazali mentions three topics or three things that clearly contradict Islam, and it is affirmed by these philosophers. So what are these three things? First is the affirmation, or the affirmation by the philosophers, specifically speaking, the Aristotelian philosophers, or the commentators of Aristotelian philosophy, Ibn Sīnā and Al-Farabi. They both affirm the eternality of the world. They both affirm the eternality, or that the universe or the world is since eternity with God. It is co-eternal with God. Then the second is their affirmation, the second is their negation of attributes of God. So the philosophers, they hold to a negative or negationist view of the attributes of God. So Al-Ghazali is mentioning that they do not uphold the occurrence of the world or the universe or the alam, whatever you want to call it. They don't uphold the affirmation of attributes of God, and they do not uphold the creed of resurrection of bodies. And they have the reasoning for it, which we will get to. So these are the three main points that Al-Ghazali in principle rejects. Al-Ghazali aims in this book to affirm the creed, but his affirmation is not that of proving or showing arguments for it. Rather, what he aims to do is to demand proof and to refute what is not correct, rather than showing proofs or establishing what is correct. That is another book, mainly Iqtisad fil I'tiqad, where he does do that. So this is what he aims to do. And what he will do in this book is he will show that the claims of these philosophers that they make, they're not certain. They are very, very ambiguous or uncertain, and hence the implications that they make from it are also uncertain. He will go ahead and show, and Al-Ghazali here, he clearly states that he will show how some of these doctrines, and I quote, "I will force on them at one time necessary adherence to the Mu'tazili doctrine, at other times the Karamiya doctrine, and sometimes another doctrine." So he's showing that he will show that some of their beliefs or some of their positions that they hold, it logically necessitates the positions of the Mu'tazila or the Karamiya. And then he makes an interesting point. He states that I, however, will not rise to defend any one doctrine, but will make all the sects as one group against them, these philosophers, these specific philosophers. For the rest of the sects may differ from us in matters of detail, whereas these specifically, these kind of philosophers, challenge the very principles of a religion. So this is what Al-Ghazali is trying to do. Then in the fourth introduction, he makes this very clear, that one of the tricks of the philosophers, he talks about the tricks of the philosophers. They entice the people and they confront them. Whenever the people come up to them, they challenge them in a way. They say that these beliefs that they hold, they're very complex, they're very scientific, mathematic. It is very hard to come to these conclusions. Hence, these conclusions are for the intellectual elites, because they rely on the mastery of philosophical sciences. Specifically, what they mention is mathematical, geometrical, and arithmetic sciences. So Al-Ghazali mentions that first, the three sciences that specifically the philosophers mention is mathematics, in specific arithmetic and geometry, and logic. So Al-Ghazali talks about these three. He mentions that first of all, arithmetics has nothing to do with it. One more thing that I would like to add. Ilahiyat is it's not exactly what we would consider mathematics. in today's day and age. Ilahiyat is the first science in a way. It is the science of God. It is basically doing rationalizing about God specifically, or rationalizing about the cause of everything. Metaphysics would be a bit more than that. For example, metaphysics can also be about mind and consciousness. And even though, yes, ilahiyat sure can be, but the core purpose of ilahiyat, and specifically what is being referred to here, is the science of God or study of God specifically. So here Al-Ghazali mentions that arithmetic has nothing to do with it. Arithmetic is free from it. What is arithmetic? Basically, these maths where we add, subtract, multiply. Basic A plus B equals C, that kind of thing. Right? So what does he say? Metaphysics has no relation to it. The statement that understanding of metaphysics is in need of it is nonsense. It is as if one were to say that medicine, grammar, and physiology require it, or that arithmetic is in need of medicine. So he's saying that they have no relation. They have no relation to each other. It is as if you're saying that arithmetic needs medicine and medicine needs arithmetic. Right? There is no direct link with each other. One might then argue that, okay, maybe even though there is no direct link, but when you get to the chemicals and when you get to this, we need maths. Yeah, but that's chemistry. It's not medicine in a sense. Like, what he means by medicine is this has an effect and this heals. This is what it basically means, rather than what we would understand in modern understanding of medicine. Right? We need to be very careful that we do not read into the writings of Al-Ghazali, because he's talking with the language of his time. What he means by medicine is of his time. What he means by mathematics is of his time. And also what he means by philosophy is what he understood of his time and of his context. We need to keep that in mind. Then he also mentions geometry. He says, yeah, sure, geometry helps us understand the celestial bodies, their orbits, and so on and so forth. And these, maybe even the shape of the earth, and it's things like this. Yeah, sure, they help. The distance and size and stuff like that. These things help. But he gives the example of someone who constructs a house. For example, if I construct a house and it's designed or whatever, then you can say that, okay, this house is constructed by a human being. The human being must have will to construct the house. He must have power to move the objects. He must have knowledge. He must have knowledge of the house, like a blueprint or something. That is basically metaphysics. And he's saying that understanding that or reaching that conclusion is irrelevant to what shape the house is. The house can have different architecture, different shapes in it, different geometry in it. That does not affect my conclusion that I will reach, that the one who made the house must have will, power, knowledge. He's saying that there is no direct link or connection here. Then we move on to the third statement of the philosophers, that they need understanding of logic. Here Al-Ghazali agrees that yes, understanding logic is necessary and it's very crucial. But once again, he makes something clear. Logical science must be mastered. That is true. But logic is not confined to them. This is the principle which is the discipline of theology we name the book of reflection. They change its expression to logic, to magnify it. We can also call it the book of argumentation. And we may call it the cognitions of intellect. But when the one seeking to be clever, who is weak, or basically dumb, hears the name logic, mantiq, he thinks it is unfamiliar art, unknown to the theologians, known only by the philosophers. So someone, for example, if the philosophers say that you need to study logic to understand what we're trying to say, you need to be an expert in logic to know our metaphysics. A layman will think that, okay, logic, the philosophers know logic, and this is logic. Theologians don't talk about logic. They don't have books about logic. They don't teach that stuff. They might think that. Al-Ghazali is saying that that is not the case. We do study that. We do teach that. We do learn that. We just don't call it that. It's basically a difference in the language structure of what they might deem as logic. It is different terminology rather than the content. In order to drive away this nonsense and uproot this ruse for leading astray, we see it set aside the discussing the cognition of intellect in this book. So Al-Ghazali, what he's basically saying here, he's saying that to make clear these errors and make clear these debates, he will argue not in the language of the theologians. He will argue in the language of the philosophers and their logicians, right? So here we can see how, rather than Al-Ghazali refuting or pushing away philosophy, he took from them. He incorporated it in his theological framework to answer the philosophers. Very clear. So Al-Ghazali also makes this point that to understand this book, which is the Incoherence of the Philosophers, it is very crucial to read another work of his, which is the Standard of Knowledge, or Miyarul Ilm. So why does he say that? Basically saying that to understand the terminology that is going to be used in this book, it is very necessary to understand that book. Inshallah, in our course, in our series, I will hopefully be trying to explain it as much as I can. So hopefully we won't need to be covering the standard of knowledge itself. Maybe in the future, if my viewers or the people who are watching want me to cover that book, I'll be happy to do so. Then Al-Ghazali mentions, after covering the introduction, now is when the introduction has finished. Then he mentions the table of content. Now he's talking about what he will be covering in this book. I will be posting that on the screen right now. So inshallah ta'ala, we will be covering this entire table of content in our series. So for that, I really hope I'll get some support. You guys can subscribe, reach out to my Patreon. And hopefully, I don't know how long this will take, but we'll get to the end. With that, thank you all for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.